Kia ora. This is a July recap and the August TBR. So, July recap, I read quite a few, read all of these books, or at least finished them in this month. We'll start with Chess by Stefan Zweig. This one was really good. It definitely captures what the game of chess is like, but also it captures the political situation of Austria in the late 30s and early 40s. It's very it this I mean the back basically gives away what this novel is about, but I went into this not really knowing what it was going to be about. I knew it was going to be about chess, but I didn't realize the other themes that this has that you know you might or know if you've looked into it, but I basically went into this blind and it was very good. Yeah, I recommend it. And then I read Ecce Homo by Friedrich Nietzsche. This was pretty good. You can definitely tell that Friedrich Nietzsche was on the cusp of a psychotic break during this novel, or during this collection of essays, or this essay. He was definitely, he's sort of flirting with grandiose ideas that some of them reflect how the world is, but others he seems to have kind of slightly gone off the deep end. Anyway, it was very enjoyable. It's a good Nietzsche book if you want like a sample of what he's about. And it's sort of a collection of him looking back at his body of work. So, yeah, this was the last thing he published before his psychotic break, and yeah, it's quite good. Didn't like it as much as Chess, but it was a good book from the Penguin Archive. Then go on to some fantasy. So I picked up a random Michael Moorcock book from a secondhand bookstore. So The Oak and the Ram, which is the second book in a trilogy. I didn't read the first one. This one was pretty good. It was slightly surreal, very old school, new wave vibes. Sort of had that science fiction new wave thing going on, but it was more in a fantasy setting than a strictly science fiction setting. So, yeah, Michael Moorcock is a new wave, is a new wave artist, and he's interesting. I need to read a bit more of his stuff to really get a grasp on what he's about. But I liked it, but it was more just an easy read in between some harder reads. So, yeah, nice and breezy. And then the Prince of Anthwyn by Evangeline Walton. Honestly, I can't pronounce that word because it is in Welsh, but this is basically the first book in the first branch of the Mabygonian, which is a fantasy retelling of the Mabygonian, and to like a narrative that makes a bit more sense than. So the Mabygonian is basically the Welsh epic, and it's essentially a collection of folk stories and Welsh fairy tales, and they loosely connect, but this author what she's done is she's retold these Welsh stories in a more coherent narrative and attach things together in a way that makes more sense than the fractured original text. It was pretty good. This is something that I do want to revisit. I think it is worth revisiting, but it was pretty good, but not really jaw-dropping or anything. I enjoyed it, but yeah. And then this is just one of the books that I read when I'm going to get coffee while I'm working, and read these short little Penguin modern classics. These are really cheap and they're pretty good, quite varied. So this is Italo Calvino, The Distance of the Moon. So this is basically a collection of short stories, very short stories, that take physics, astronomy concepts, and then tells it in sort of like a postmodern story. So the title story is talking about the creation of the moon, and it's got characters who jump between the moon and the earth as the moon is forming. And some of the latest stories include the sun and the planets forming around in the solar system, and talks about quasars and all sorts of different stuff. I really enjoyed this, but this was more kind of like a, while I'm waiting for coffee to be made kind of read. Very good at using your brain, but nice and short that you don't have to commit to a long narrative. I would probably reread this again when I run out of books to read on coffee breaks, but this was quite nice. And then I read a volume of manga. I read the first volume of Bloom Into You. I'm not going to talk about this one too long, but it's a Yuri manga, and I'd watched the anime and I enjoyed it, and this was a very good manga, and I want to get more volumes of it. I've got a review of this book, but The Book of Disquiet by Fernando Pessoa. I really, really like this one. It's probably my favorite book so far this year. My thoughts on it are more complete in that review, but needless to say, it very much captures the idle thoughts that someone might have whilst working and just existing, and it captures a lot of these thoughts that you just have, and articulates kind of like what was sort of an unconscious notion into words, and it's very, very good. I highly recommend this. And then the last book, well, not the last in terms of chronologically how I read them, but the last in this pile is We Do Not Part by Han Kang. This was great. This was very good, but very, very harrowing and tragic and psychologically devastating. It was quite an easy read in terms of the complexity of the prose. Not to say that the prose didn't have depth to them, but it wasn't, unlike say the Book of Disquiet, which challenged you at times. This was quite easy to read, but the subject matter was very intense and made it actually quite difficult to get through at points. I'd put this down earlier this year, and then I picked it back up later just because I wanted something else to read, and I'm glad I finished it. This was very good. I'm definitely looking forward to reading anything else that Han Kang has worked on. Obviously, Nobel Prize winner, etc. And this is a good book. Okay, and then there are a bunch of books that I want to get through, but this is kind of like the short list. So this was one of my birthday gifts to myself that arrived only just recently, but Borges Collected Fictions. So this is basically all of Borges's fictions that he wrote. So he's an Argentinian short story writer. Was quite prolific, or not quite prolific, but very influential, and is considered a world classic author, a classic world author. So I've read some of his work, but I want to get through all of it. Nice Penguin Deluxe Edition deckled edges, and this is a good volume, and I've just started it. So yeah, it doesn't. This book doesn't have any introduction, which is different from most of the deluxe editions that I've read, which do have introductions. Borges introduces some of his own work, but there isn't an not an authorial or editorial. There isn't a solid editorial presence with the lack of introduction. So it's interesting that way, but the work does truly speak for itself. I feel like explaining this work sort of spoils it in many senses. And there is a bit of information on the back and on the French flaps, so it's not like there's nothing, but it is a work that you do need to come up with your own opinion of it. And then finally, I just started collecting Dragon Ball. So I have read Dragon Ball in the past, but recently some events conspired in a way that made me want to pick up this series again. And I was thinking, do I go with the anime and watch it? But I feel like ultimately, the anime is good, but I really want to pay homage to Akira Toriyama, and I think the manga is the way to go. So yeah, this is the Viz 3-in-1s, and there are a lot of very inappropriate jokes specifically in this volume. So I'm not going to be showing any pages of this. Not that there aren't pages that I can show, but it's yeah. It does have a tendency of shocking viewers in its 80s sensibilities, but it is a very funny and very well written, and there are a lot of jokes in this that I hadn't picked up on last time, just having more context for the journey to the West and stuff like that. So it's quite witty, it's very good, and it'll be interesting to see how the series progresses in manga format. But anyway, that's my July recap, and short, small August TBR, but I will probably read other things, but these are the two books that I definitely want to get through. I'm really set on reading Borges. I was going to read this month, but it didn't arrive until very recently, and Dragon Ball was sort of a spontaneous pickup, but I'm probably going to chip away at that. So yeah, got my tea, and yeah, cheers.